different than you. Shit. More money, more problems. I saw them this way to tell you the truth. Allow me to reintroduce myself. Welcome to the cruel world that we all living in. Still chasing them dividends. Whether it's thousands or millions, it's still a hustle, ain't it? The grind is universal. Might take muscle to gain the upper hand. Some understand.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of An American Deception. I'm your host, Red Tail Hawk, also known as Tavis Sanders. We'd like to welcome our co-host, Renee Sanders, also known as Red Silver Fox.
Greetings, everyone.
All right, we appreciate your comments and your questions in regards to the show and your participation. We get a lot of good information, a lot of good feedback from people, and so today we wanted to take a minute and acknowledge everybody that's been hitting us up and just answer some of your questions that we thought was pretty decent questions, and definitely keep them coming, because if you don't hear your question and comment this time, we definitely get back to you. Okay, how that sound to you? That sound good?
Sounds great. Let's go.
All right, cool. Okay, so first question is where or how did the lighter skinned native tribes and or members develop, considering the aboriginals or natives originally discovered in Americas were of a copper tone? So you want to answer that question?
Okay, well, we can first begin by saying that that they were not just copper tones, that there were many complexions from light to dark.
Right.
Okay, and that happened because there were many migrations that happened that came over here to North America. So it wasn't just one migration. One of the first migrations, or what there is evidence of, is 51,000 years ago. There is evidence of human existence in several areas in the Americas, and one in particular in North America, in the South Carolina area.
Okay, cool. So, all right. So what you said is that there were more than one migration into the Americas.
Yes.
And so, because of those different migrations, the different skin tones were around or appeared in America.
They developed from these different migrations, and the people mixing from the different migrations.
Pre-colonial periods.
Oh yes, pre-colonial.
Okay,
times.
yeah. So
yes.
Before Columbus and that migration occurred.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So you said South Carolina.
That's correct.
That's our hometown. So I like to hear a little bit about this.
Yes.
So yeah, tell us about what you found in South Carolina.
Okay. Well, as a matter of fact, one of the areas is in Allendale County,
Which is definitely our home state. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, the University of South Carolina has been doing a lot of excavations and things in that area, and that's where they have found evidence of 51,000 years ago of human existence there.
Yeah. Well, I just said my family's from Allendale, so that history really does matter to me. What was going on here. We have a history that says that people were existing in this area for 55,000 years, way before anything else that they want to talk about here in America.
Yes.
And so, I really like, this question personally.
Yeah, and another thing is, what is interesting is that this area, this Allendale County area, tens of thousands of years later though, but still this area was an area where there was a very large Indian trading post that was in that area.
And so the Indian trading post that was existing during the colonial periods, and I know that it later turned into plantations, because I know at the Indian trading post, they were also trading, amongst other things, slaves.
They were trading slaves, yes. And it turned into really one of the largest slave plantations that was in South Carolina and even North America. I do believe that became one of the largest plantations.
Okay, real quick, let's just get back to what they found sediment. They found sediment of human activities. I just wanted to make sure that the crowd was aware of what we were saying.
Right, they did not find bones, and that is one thing that they didn't find, but they did find sediment. They found carbon remains left behind by the people, so it was showing that people were there burning things, and they also found tools there also.
And again, this is going to be around the time that migration started to really happen around the world, where people really started to get up and move beyond a central location, started traveling all over the place.
Right, that's Yes, that's correct. Yes, and yes, so it's not too long after that started happening, after the humans started their migrations. One of the migrations, which usually they don't mention, but there is the evidence here.
You know, one more thing I like to point out as a part of this question is that this area right here, the plantation itself, you know, eventually the trading post became a slave plantation.
Yes.
You know, but I know that in certain parts of South Carolina, they separated the native slaves from the African slaves.
Yes.
And so, you know, I know in the deeper parts of South Carolina where the native slaves were held, and the upper part was where the African slaves were held.
Yes, that's correct, and that's because it was those trading posts, and those trading posts, part of their business was to sell these slaves, these Indians that were captured. They would keep them there where the trading posts were, and then the Europeans would come to the posts and they would purchase slaves.
Right.
They would purchase their Native American slaves there.
And then I'm assuming if you didn't buy a slave, the slave stayed, they worked, they became a part of the society of wherever was going on, and
eventually
lost their identity.
And again, with the plantations changing hands and going through generations, and with the Europeans marrying into these Native American tribes, they eventually were the ones that took over the land.
Okay.
And so the land, by the time the 1800s comes, is now belonging to a European, but it is still the same area where these slaves were kept, and now their descendants are there
now, being held as slaves.
Yes.
Right. So I guess, well, you know, we can talk about some other things too, because now they also, well, let's talk about some of the other migrations that occurred. You know, we talked about the first migration that happened about 51,000 years ago. Let's
Yes.
talk about some of the other ones and how some of the color variations may have taken place. Layman's term individual would just consider, okay, these people had to have been coming out of Africa because that was the central location for human activity.
as far as we know today.
Right, as far as we know. And so we're going to just surmise that these people came from Africa that landed in South Carolina area.
Yes, and if you really look at a map, you will see that there is a much shorter distance from Africa
to
across the ocean to the Americas than it is leaving from Asia, trying to come over here to the Americas from Asia.
It's not just in South Carolina too. There's a few other points in South America that also can be dated to around that point.
Oh yes, South America and also in Mexico.
Also in Mexico.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so now let's talk about some of the other migrations. We had three more?
At least two more.
Okay.
The biggest migration that we speak of is the one that came across the Bering Strait, or it was called Beringia at that point, because it wasn't a strait yet, and because it was a very large landmass. And they say that this migration happened maybe between 20 and 15 or 13,000 years ago.
Okay.
Is when this migration happened.
Yeah, I hear about 16 most of the time when I look.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when this migration started happening, coming across and down the west coast, and then they kind of settled in the area where they call them the Clovis people.
Okay.
And it's because this is an area that was Clovis, New Mexico, and where they started finding points that they believed were the first tools that they found of human habitation here, and they labeled them Clovis points.
Okay. Now, this theory was the predominant theory for a long time. It still is, as a matter of fact.
It still is. It was a theory that was really developed in the early 1700s, and it has not changed.
Okay. Now, you said that they called these points Clovis points because this was supposed to be the first evidence of inhabitation here in America.
Of human habitation, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
However, however, there is evidence of what they're now calling pre-Clovis points. And some of these pre-Clovis points they are finding in the South Carolina area. There's other areas in Pennsylvania. There's an area in Virginia, West Virginia, I do believe. And so there are areas where they're finding pre-Clovis points, which means that there were people over here before the Clovis people came,
Right.
or the people that they're labeling Clovis people. And so now you have these people that have come over from the Beringia or from the Bering Strait that are now mingling or intermingling once they travel with people who were already here.
Okay.
And so now, of course, you're going to get skin variations because there are people that are coming from 2 different areas.
Right. And I know we had another migration from Europe.
There's another one, yes, that came from that came across from Europe, around Newfoundland,
Okay.
and then down.
And
so now you have another
even,
culture of people, you know, that is going to bring another skin tone, and so now they're being added to the other ones that were already here.
Okay.
And so now you have skin variations, just like with people of color that exist today, that were from light to dark, that was here in the Americas
All over
when
the
the
place.
Europeans arrived.
And they were all over the place.
All over, yes.
Okay, so the skin variation, these things are just a natural part of the evolution of human beings, and what we are and what we're doing is really not that big of a deal.
That's correct, yes. Yes.
It's not that big of a deal, but nonetheless, you know, people want to talk about it, and people need to really know the information.
That's correct, yes.
It is what it is sometimes.
And it happened over tens of thousands of years.
Okay, so I mean, I guess we really answered the second part of the question, and that was, well, you know what, we can mention it, and that's that the question stated that were they also natives to this land, or were they portions of settlers grafted into the culture? Meaning, are the lighter skinned Native Americans the Caucasian that got assimilated into the native culture through marriages and the like?
Well, and of course that happened.
That happened
also.
too,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
But it's not.
did happen.
It didn't start there, and it sure enough didn't finish there.
That's it. Yes, that is correct.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's go to the next question.
Okay.
The next question comes from Cosmic Dragonfly, and it says, why the Native Americans we see look Indian? Let's go a little bit farther. It says, is it because the deeply melanated indigenous peoples were systematically folded into the category of Negro, and the Indian-looking indigenous peoples were left to help reinforce the deception? You know, and then she goes on to say that that's her theory.
Right.
So, you know, what do you think about that? I think that's a good question. I mean, it's
Well,
a good
that
question.
is a good question, and my opinion is
Okay.
is that that this look that we say is an Indian look is something that was really indoctrinated into us. You know, that that especially by the 1900s, when movies started being produced, and you know, you have more pictures and more images of Indians that were coming about, that that by that time, because of what was happening in the Americas and how they were trying to create a black-white society, so when they were doing this, so you know, you have your lighter skinned ones, which is the ones that they want you to think are the Indians, and then those images that we have seen and many times over tens and decades of years, that now this is what we assume is an Indian look.
Right. And so some of them look like that, you know, and some of them look like the so-called Indians that we would perceived to be native or indigenous to this land.
Yeah, that's correct. And however, there were many looks. They all did not have long hair. You know, some of them were short. They wore them in different styles. They you know, so what we perceive the image of Indian is again something that was indoctrinated.
Right. It's something that they want us to see it as. I mean, and just to piggyback off your point, if they look at a lot of the older pictures of Native Americans, you know, they weren't even drawn by people that saw what Native Americans looked like.
They did not even set a foot in the United States or the Americas at all. These were Europeans that were drawing images of what was being told to them. So it's
not an accurate depiction.
Definitely not.
Not at all. All right, so yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you very much, Cosmic Dragonfly. All right, so before we go, let's take a small break, and we come right back.
Okay.
All right, so we see you in a second. You're watching An American Deception on Philly Cam, Comcast 66, Verizon 29. Welcome back to An American Deception. Today we're going over some questions and comments from our viewers. Again, like to thank you for your comments and your questions, and please continue to email us or leave us your comments or concerns definitely check us out on Facebook at Indigenous Education. Indeed, you can email us at indeed.edu@gmail.com and check our show out, An American Deception, on YouTube. Yeah.
And our website.
And our website. Definitely check our website out, indeed-edu.org. Cool, right?
Yes.
You got a lot of ways to connect with us. That's what's up. It's getting better. Okay, so let's get back to the questions and comments. This one is from Long Lance. It's an interesting question. Let's read the first part. I would like to know what your opinions are on the Virginia Indians and Walter Plecker. And see, that's a loaded question by itself, because there's a lot of nasty stuff. Despite Walter Plecker, Virginia has a lot of history that a lot of people don't know about. A lot of the taxes that they were using to divide peoples and label people.
Right, that's true. And even though Walter Plecker did a lot of things, a lot of harsh things to people of color, however, he was really only carrying out the laws that were created, some of them even hundreds of years previous to him when he became...
Well, he was the register of vital... He was the first register for vital statistics.
Okay, in Virginia.
In Virginia,
yes,
right. And so he's the one that put all of that together in Virginia. And so, he had a good deal to do with the foundation on how it was going to work and what was going to be counted, who was going to be counted as what. And I personally think that he just, like you said, used a lot of the things that had been established before him for the past 300 years. It was saying, okay, now we can finally do this. We can finally put this in the books and use this to exclude any native from ever existing in the state of Virginia.
Yeah, and again, some of these laws even started in the 1600s.
Right.
There was one law where they outlawed intermarriage between a white person and a Negro or an Indian. So it was both of them. And so it was against the law.
And that was in the state of Virginia.
That was in Virginia. And most times what happened in Virginia
happened everywhere else.
Happened in the rest of the colonies.
Right. It's that shared responsibility thing that the colonists, tried to create as a part of the states.
Yes,
now. Yeah,
right.
it worked pretty good too. It might not have worked in our favor, but it worked. All right, so the laws. Let's talk about some of these laws that had occurred before Walter Plecker, which he was now able to use as a legal means to I guess accomplish his goals as far as the the two classes of people.
Right. Well, another law that happened in the 1600s still, there were many laws that began back that time. One of the laws that when they were capturing slaves, they captured many Indians as slaves, and what happened in, I do believe it was either 1670 or somewhere around that time, is where they made a law where they would not label the Indians an Indian by that time. If they got captured, they were just lumped into a category that was called Negroes and other slaves.
Okay.
And eventually these Negroes and other slaves, what happened is that the other slaves got dropped, and after a few decades that all of these slaves just became Negroes.
Okay.
There was another very interesting law that I need to read this one.
Okay.
This one was in 1705. I'm not sure how much they practiced this one, but it's on the books. Okay. And this one is stated, "Be it enacted that the child of an Indian and the child, grandchild, or great-grandchild of a Negro shall be deemed, accounted, held, and taken to be mulatto."
Okay.
Now that is very interesting, and that's because then later on, even in this book that I got this from, it went on to say that eventually the child of a Negro by a Negro and of an Indian by an Indian would have been a mulatto. And after one generation, there would have been no Indian or Negro, but all would have been mulattoes.
So the whole state would have been mulatto, thereby erasing any native or indigenous peoples. They can do whatever they want to now. You know, and
yes.
they stripping that identity again.
That was yes, very interesting.
And what you said, when was, now first let's give the audience, what book was that? You mentioned that this was the book. Do you remember?
This is a book that was called Virginia, wait a minute, I have it here, Virginia Reports.
The Virginia Reports.
Yes.
You know, just to make sure that y'all can go back and, you know, kind of reference this information and check it out for yourself. So yeah, but the Virginia Reports is actually a lot of different things, because I know some court, there were also a bunch of different court decisions that would allow Walter Pecker to carry out his race war or his two class wars.
Well, in the 1700s and 1800s, there were many court records, many, because there were many people who were fighting against what they were being called. You know, there were many Native Americans that were being called Negroes, and they were fighting. The only way that they could fight that was in court, and some of them won, some of them didn't.
Right.
You know, so yeah. Oh, there's many court.
I know.
About that.
Did the 116th rule come from Virginia? Was that a Virginia?
Okay, well.
No, that's Oklahoma.
Yeah, that ended up in Oklahoma in the early 1900s.
Okay.
But before that, you know, there were laws. So again, in Virginia, there's a law that happened in 1866. So this would be right after the emancipation.
Okay.
All right. But this one, and again, this one is defining who the Indians were. Okay. And this is an 1866 law that was trying to define who the Indians were, and it stated, every person having 1/4 or more Negro blood shall be deemed a colored person, and every person not a colored person having 1/4 or more Indian blood shall be deemed Indian. Okay? So again, that means that a person who could have been 3/4 Indian, if it was said that they had Negro in their family or in their bloodline, even if that Negro, if it was a slave, and remember, we already said that some of these slaves got labeled Negro, but they were still Indians.
Correct.
Okay, but they got labeled Negro. But if that person got labeled Negro, now the whole family now, because of this law,
Is now a Negro.
is now a colored person.
A colored person. But and they're not allowed. They're not able to be identified as their, you know, native self.
That's correct.
You know,
Yes.
and, okay, thereby, you know, again, that was one court decision that stripped away how many Native Americans from being
right.
able to be identified as such.
But notice also, though, that it said, you know, the law went on to say that every person not a colored person having 1/4 or more Indian blood shall be deemed Indian.
Okay. So now you take away the native colored, and you can include a new population of Native Americans that would be the European mix.
That's right, because of the Europeans. So now, if you had a person who was 3/4 white or European that married a Native American, now that entire family now can be labeled Native American.
And from with that tactic until today, you know, we can see that a lot of the some of the tribes, you know, utilizing these rules and these laws can be, you know, identified as Native, but they may be European or more than
more European ancestry than the Native ancestry. Yes, and also with the black people, they had more Native ancestry
than African
they may have had
ancestry.
African ancestry, if they had any African ancestry at all. You know, but now because of this law, they're now not able to claim their Native ancestry.
Correct. And then from that 1/4 rule, we move.
It goes on. You know, yes. In 1900, well, there was a legislative act of 1910
Okay.
that said that a black person was one who had 1/16 or more Native blood. Okay. So now you're talking about great-great-grandparents. So now again, when we're talking about 16 grandparents, 16 great-grandparents, and if just one of them was labeled a Negro, even though they may not have been, that means that now you are now considered black or Negro. So that means that 15 of your great-grandparents could have been Native American. But just because of one was labeled one thing, you now have that Negro label for the rest of eternity.
And in reverse, you could have 15 European grandparents one Native American, and now you're allowed to be classified as a Native American.
That's correct.
With all the benefits thereof.
That is correct. And those that were able to claim that in the early 1900s, if they were just 1/16th, you know, what are they now after what, 4 generations,
Right.
or maybe
Another 100 years. After 100 years, you know, maybe 2 or 3 generations.
Yes.
Wow, right. And that's definitely, well, Virginia, I mean.
But again, it wasn't just Virginia. You know, that Virginia was one of the colonies, but then all the rest of the colonies really followed suit behind Virginia.
Well, even with, I know Virginia was Virginia shipping slaves out 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 5-to-1 as far as the Native men and African men.
Well, Virginia and South Carolina.
Okay.
You know, so yeah, both of them were doing that extensively. You know, and they're really cousin colonies,
Right.
Virginia and South Carolina.
Right.
You know, but then we go on, you know, because even after that, we have by 1924, which is really also the same year that that Walter Plecker's racial
Integrity Act, was
yes,
it? Okay.
Yes, but it was also during that year in 1924 that in Oklahoma, that they had a ruling in Oklahoma that stated that 1 drop of slave blood taints the stream and makes it African in descent. So again, this and they went so far as not even to say Negro blood.
They said
they
slave
just
blood.
said slave blood. So again, so just 1 drop of slave blood makes it African in descent.
You know what? I never thought about this before, but I beg to ask the question: what about all of the European slaves that originally came over here? You know, they had slave blood in them too. Matter of fact, those are the people that wound up being the governors and the people that actually were running the definitely down in the southern colonies. You know, they ran a lot of the politics.
Yes, later on they did.
Yeah,
Later
a
on
lot of
they did.
their children.
Some of them were fighting in the early days though, because some of the indentured servants,
Right.
Really that was Bacon's Rebellion back in the 1600s, because and that was one thing that really started race in particular, because they didn't want these white indentured servants. They didn't like fighting their own people. And so then that's why, okay, well, you know what, we need to make a class of people that are going to be a subservient race. And this is where this idea of race came from. In the 1600s, there was no such thing as race.
Okay, right. Well, you know, just to piggyback Baker's Rebellion, because you mentioned that, didn't really give any backdrop. Baker's Rebellion was a low-class, mainly Caucasian rebellion.
Yes, it was. Yeah, they were the indentured servants that once because the indentured servants, after 7 years, they were to, you know, they have served their term. They were supposed to
get their 40 acres and a mule.
Land, and I think it was they were given 50 acres.
Oh, they got 50.
Yeah,
okay.
they got 50 acres, and
Even
then they still had difficulty because the elite still had to control. So they still had to go to the elite to get supplies. They had to go to the elite for everything that they wanted, and they did not like that.
Okay.
And so they caused this rebellion, you know, and they really, Jamestown got burned down. And so when that happened, that's when they were like, look, we need to do something about this. We need to make a subservient race so that we don't have our Christian people
Fighting against each other.
Fighting against each other, yes.
And this is where the idea of dividing, you know, creating a race in America really, you know, started to formulate.
So that you can see
The
the
difference.
slave race and a superior race.
Politically is a lot easier situation to control.
Oh yes, and all of this was accomplished through laws.
Correct, right.
It was all accomplished through laws.
And then Walter Plecker, you know, and his
He's really just the icing on the cake, because what he did, he just carried out everything that preceded him.
Right, so he didn't necessarily even had to be the catalyst for anything. All he had to do was read the rules and say, okay, let's make this rule carry out, let's carry this rule out. And he had the authority by being the first to establish that vital statistics for Virginia.
That's right, and he did it with a vengeance.
Well, he did a job good. You know, he did.
You have to give him credit for that, right? He did his job.
He did a job good. All right, so we hope to get to another show soon. I appreciate all your comments, all your concerns. appreciate the love, y'all. I hope y'all have a good day, and see you next time. Peace.
Peace.
I ain't no different than you, shit. More money, more problems, I solemnly swear to tell you the truth. Allow me to reintroduce myself. Welcome to the cruel world that we all living in. Still chasing them dividends, whether it's thousands or millions. It's still a hustle, ain't it? The grind is universal. Might take muscle to gain the upper hand. Some understand there ain't no perfect picture painted. I do what I gotta do, I ain't no different than you, shit. From the corner to the corporate offices, people around here ain't playing by they money, sonny. Hungry wolves on the prowl. But I'm a veteran, most decorated 4-star general, Colin Powell. And it don't take a rocket scientist to know that I'll never surrender my flag. Never pretend Yamasee ain't shining, I'm the golden child.